The second group of traditions, which we will place among the ways of wisdom, because they see human spiritual development as first and foremost a question of right knowledge, are Hinduism, Buddhism, and the Jaina tradition. Here we focus on the first two. These traditions have two important antecedents. One is the Indus Valley civilization, which we have already discussed briefly. Grain cultivation in villages emerged in this region around 7,700 before the Common Era. Drier conditions favored urbanization by 2600 before the Common Era, and eventually led to the decline of the civilization by the middle of the next millennium. As we mentioned earlier, Indus Valley civilization cities seem to have been largely trading centers and lacked the large religious monuments such as temples or pyramids which characterize other Bronze Age civilizations. Nor, for that matter, is there clear evidence of either priests or kings or well-defined fortification. What we do find are large pools, which may have been either ritual baths or the cultic centers of a river goddess, probably the predecessor of the later Hindu Sarasvati. We also find female figures, which may be statues of this goddess. It was long believed that the Indus Valley civilization was destroyed by invasions from the north by Aryan peoples who brought Sanskrit and the Vedic religion. Most scholars today reject this view and argue that the civilization collapsed instead due to more arid conditions. But we do know that around 1500, Aryan speakers did begin to migrate into the region. Until around 1200, these peoples were primarily pastoral and nomadic. But after that, they began to form settled communities called Ganasangas, with a kind of elective monarchic or quasi-republican structure. According to philologist Georges Dumézil, all Indo-European societies had a tripartite social structure, with a judicial and priestly stratum at the top, followed by a warrior elite, and finally by the producing classes at the bottom. This theory is much contested, but provides one account of the origin of the Vedic Varna system, which divided Indian society into four groups: the Brahmins, who were scholars, advisors, priests, and teachers; the Kshatriya, who were rulers and warriors; the Vaishya, who were merchants, cattle herders, and skilled craftsmen; and the Shudra, who performed less skilled crafts and tilled the soil. The idea is that the first three groups represent the Aryan tribes which migrated into the region and became dominant, and the Shudra, the indigenous peoples who were incorporated into the new Vedic order. Forest dwellers and others who remained out of the Vedic order became Dalits, who were considered ritually impure. Vedic religion, as the religion of an originally pastoral people, was centered on sacrifice. It is, after all, by killing their animals that pastoral peoples survive. Central to the Vedic worldview was the idea that sacrifice is, in fact, the origin of the universe. Indeed, their creation story focuses on the sacrifice of a primordial human, Purusha, whose dismembered parts form the various parts of the universe and the four Varnas which make up the society. This creative sacrifice was reenacted on open-air Vedic altars using cattle or horses. As Vedic society gradually became more urban after around 600 to 500 before the Common Era, kings who wanted to claim precedence over other tribal leaders would release a horse to roam for a year and then sacrifice it, holding a great feast at which they invited other rulers to pay homage and pledge fealty to them. It was at one such Rajasuya, tradition has it, that the great Mahabharata war began. As in the other centers of Afro-Eurasian civilization, India underwent an Axial Age transformation. This took the form of a variety of competing sects. The Charavakas, rather like the Greek sophists, taught that the old stories of the gods were just a way of controlling people. They argued that we know only what we can experience with the senses, that morality is no more than a convention, and that we should live in such a way as to maximize pleasure and power. The Ajavikas upheld similar epistemological and metaphysical doctrines, but were also strict determinists, and believed that the rampant pursuit of pleasure would lead only to misery and frustration. They therefore taught a life of self-discipline and renunciation. The Jaina, on the other hand, were non-theistic dualists who taught that involvement in the world, regardless of its moral quality, led to the accumulation of karma and thus to being trapped in the cycle of rebirth or samsara. Only by refraining from action as much as possible, and especially from harming other sentient beings, could one find liberation. Buddhism emerged in the foothills of the Himalayas as an attempt to find a middle way between the nihilistic hedonism of the Caravaka and the radical asceticism of groups like the Jaina and the Ajavika. Siddhartha Gautama, called the Buddha or Enlightened One, taught what later Buddhism called the Four Noble Truths. First, life is suffering. Second, suffering has a cause, which is attachment or craving. Third, attachment or craving can be overcome. And fourth, the way to overcome attachment is through the Noble Eightfold Path. The idea here is not that there is no pleasure or even profound joy in life, but rather that because everything is temporary and impermanent, we are always either craving something which we lack or mourning the actual or impending loss of something which gives us pleasure. At a deeper level, what we crave, as for all the ways of wisdom, is the power of being as such. But as we will see, for Buddhism this does not exist, and thus all our seeking is in vain. We are trapped in a hell of contingent being from which there is no escape. Until we realize these truths, not just intellectually but experientially, we will continue to pursue an end which does not exist and remain chained to the cycle of rebirth or samsara. Our action or karma forms us in such a way that we do not even seek liberation and enlightenment. The various elements of the Noble Eightfold Path can be summarized in three main points. First, one must have a correct understanding of the nature of reality. Second, one must act consistently on this understanding. And third, one must engage in spiritual disciplines which allow one to know experientially the truth which one began to understand conceptually. For Buddhism, a correct understanding of reality means, at the very least, recognizing that there is no self. This is the doctrine of an-atman. We are just a temporary aggregate of elements which will eventually dissolve and recombine in new ways. Everything is, in the end, ultimately dependent on everything else. Nothing has the power of being in itself. This is the doctrine of interdependent origination, or paticca samuppada. The ethical imperative in Buddhism is above all compassion, which extends not just to every human being, but to all beings capable of suffering. This can mean providing immediate material aid which helps alleviate suffering, or creating a just society in which there is less suffering and in which it is easier to seek enlightenment. King Ashoka, an Indian king who, after killing thousands, completing the creation of the Mauryan Empire, repented and carried out land reform, canceled debts, and supported temples and monasteries, is a model for this reading of Buddhism. It is above all due to Ashoka's reforms that Buddhism, which was originally a doctrine for world-renouncing spiritual virtuosos, eventually became, at least temporarily, the dominant tradition in India. By spiritual practice, Buddhists above all mean meditation or bhavana. There are two basic types of meditation, samatha and vipassana. Samatha seeks to still the discursive intellect and achieve single-pointed concentration, generally by focusing attention on a specific object of meditation, most often one's own breath. Vipassana is more analytic, having as its purpose achieving a correct understanding of reality. It might focus, for example, on analyzing phenomena into their component parts until one realizes their emptiness and the dependence of everything on everything else. These doctrines have been interpreted in three different ways. The first, or Theravada layer of teachings, focuses simply on the fact that we lack a self and understands enlightenment as the non-conceptual experiential knowledge of this reality. Individuals achieve this by following the Noble Eightfold Path largely on their own, with the help only of a teacher. For most, it takes endless eons to accumulate enough merit to be born as a monk and advance sufficiently in meditation to even begin the search for enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhism goes further and argues that nothing has inherent existence and that we are all, in effect, living in each other's embrace. Those on the Mahayana path seek enlightenment not just for themselves, but for everyone. This is the Bodhisattva ideal. Mahayana tendencies vary in how they understand the aid a bodhisattva can give. At the popular level, many believe that by chanting the mantra of a particular Buddha or bodhisattva, they can achieve rebirth in a pure land in which it will be easier to achieve enlightenment. The higher Mahayana and Vajrayana schools introduce the idea of the Buddha nature, or Tathagatagarbha, which, while understood in many different ways by different tendencies, amounts to a drive present in all things towards enlightenment, and which helps explain why, if nothing has inherent existence, there is nonetheless something rather than nothing. The Vajrayana or Tantric schools also provide a variety of methods such as visualizations and interactions with deities which lead to enlightenment more quickly. What we now call Hinduism developed largely as a reaction to Buddhism over the course of many centuries. The starting point for this development was a group of texts known as the Upanishads. These texts took fundamental concepts from the Vedas and reinterpreted them in a rationalizing and spiritualizing way, so that the Vedic drama of creation through sacrifice became instead a play of illusion and enlightenment. Like Plato and like the Buddha, the Upanishads taught that the phenomenal world we experience every day is not fully real. But they rejected the Buddhist claim that nothing has the power of being in itself. Instead, they advanced the idea that behind the play of illusion that constitutes the phenomenal world, which they call Maya, there lies something called Brahman, which is the creative power of being itself. And they rejected the idea that we lack a self or Atman, and instead opened up a protracted debate regarding the relationship between Brahman and Atman, between the creative power of the universe and ourselves. The Upanishads were eventually complemented by more popular texts such as the great epics, the Mahabharata, of which the Bhagavad Gita is a part, and the Ramayana, as well as by the Puranas. Emerging Hinduism absorbed the deities of the indigenous Dravidian peoples of India, creating a pantheon very different from that of the Vedas. The result was a complex and diverse religious culture, which in reality embraced many different ways of being human. At issue here is a fundamental rejection of Buddhist and otherworldliness. While emerging Hinduism affirmed that moksha, or liberation from the cycle of rebirth, was the highest aim of human life, it recognized the legitimacy of kama, or the pursuit of pleasure, artha, the pursuit of wealth and power, and dharma, the struggle for ethical conduct in a just society. Only the spiritually most advanced would come to understand that none of these other goals was fully satisfactory, and that they could realize themselves only through union with, or by recognizing their pre-existing identity with, Brahman. There were also multiple ways to finally achieve moksha. These included Raja Yoga, or psychophysical discipline and meditation, Jnana Yoga, or intellectual self-cultivation, Karma Yoga, or right conduct, and Bhakti Yoga, or devotion to a particular god. This allowed Hinduism to integrate many other traditions, so that Buddhism became a type of Raja Yoga, and Christianity a type of Bhakti Yoga. Indeed, there are even fundamentally different understandings of the nature of reality and of what moksha might mean. Hinduism allows 6 acceptable darshanas, or philosophical perspectives, which share only a recognition of the authority of the Vedas, not a common understanding of what they mean. These too are ways of integrating the insights of other traditions into a broader synthesis. The Nyaya tradition, for example, emphasizes logic, which it takes from the Theravada and Buddhist logical schools and incorporates into a Hindu context. The Vaisheshika take Theravada and Ajivika atomism and incorporate them into Hinduism. The Samkhya take Jaina dualism and incorporate it into Hinduism as a cosmology, which was then adopted by most of the other schools. Yoga works out the practical implications of Samkhya while also providing psychophysical disciplines derived from non-Vedic schools. The Mimamsa school provided a metaphysical regrounding of Vedic orthodoxy, focusing on the word Om as a creative and redemptive power and arguing for the enduring validity of Vedic sacrifice. The Vedanta tradition focuses on debate regarding the relationship between Brahman and Atman. Are they identical? Is Brahman distinct but present in Atman, or Atman in Brahman? Or are they completely different? This is the context in which you should consider the selections from the Bhagavad Gita. Where does this text fit in the Hindu tradition? What is Krishna counseling Arjuna, and why? And what do you think?